Now, as I was making the video, I told you it could come at any time. Israel launched its response to the October 1st missile attack by Iran. So that is going on. The markets closed. We had futures close up, and then they went ahead and did it shortly thereafter. Future stays open a while longer, but after the market closes. But again, I talked about them doing it possibly on a weekend. Originally, they were going to do it on October 19th, which is last Saturday. They waited a week later because the United States leaked classified information along with the date of the attack. And so, again, I told you last weekend, going into the weekend, that there have been delays. That's why. Now doing it, and again, what will happen? We just simply don't know. Markets could have a knee-jerk reaction and then shrug it off. This is likely going to escalate into a war over the next few months. These geopolitical issues, sometimes markets react, get a knee-jerk reaction and then just kind of shrug it off. Other times, the markets get rattled for a while. This has the ability to rattle markets. Concerns about concerns about a regional war, but again. Israel is striking military targets in Iran just shortly after the markets closed, with futures on Friday, just a few hours after the closing bell. Again, this is one of the things that could be a factor, catalyst in the market. We had topping tails form. As I said, portions of the video, a good chunk of the video I made just before, because I made it right after the market closed, but I was checking the news throughout making the video because I thought they might do that over the weekend. I've been warning about this all week that, again, very well could see that happen here during the week or on the weekend ahead of, because they said they were going to do it ahead of the election. And again, we'll see what Iran does, but Israel is currently launching strikes. Iran shot, 200 missiles or so at Israel, and a couple of them got through. Most of them didn't. A couple of them got through. Didn't really do much. This is not gonna be that way. Israel's going to really do some real damage in Iran. And again, we'll see what Iran's response is. So we'll see what happens. This is likely going to escalate, and eventually, probably going into the new year, Israel will eventually strike their oil facilities and their nuclear sites. Eventually, that's going to happen. This is probably, I was listening to an Israeli general, whose predictions in Lebanon played out exactly as he said. He's saying this is probably going to go on a few months, and they're going to have a war and probably last several months. So again, does the market have a knee-jerk reaction to this? Does this rattle markets severely? We'll see what happens going into next week. But I've been warning you about this, and this could be a catalyst. And again, you just never know with geopolitical issues. It could happen over the weekend. Market could have a knee-jerk reaction to it, and then, that's it. Then it goes on and looks at earnings or looks at the Fed or the election or whatever. And we're likely in a topping process. It's possibly done. Still the possibility of divergences on the awesome oscillators. So we'll be watching to see how the market responds to all of this. And then we'll see what happens. How long does the response take? Is it just a day? Does it go on for several days? We'll see what happens. Is this response over the weekend and then begin to calm down? So again, we'll see what happens with this, aware that this is something that could rattle markets further or give markets an initial knee-jerk reaction, but then the market will shrug it off. So we'll see how it plays out a number of different ways, but aware of this. Yields popping back up on Friday after starting to go down. They pop back up, rattling markets a bit, and again, getting a topping tail at the broken trend line there in a back test. Again, some traders have been anticipating this, and that's why we're seeing the topping tail going into the weekend. And we got the same thing for the NASDAQ. Talking about these charts, but again, as I made the video, again, Israel's response had not yet taken place. I've talked about the possibility, and again, it's still possible. The information I'm going to give you, it's still possible that we see a divergence. It just depends on what happens here. Do we start seeing the markets begin to collapse and they freak out and things begin to escalate out of control, or is there a response and then the markets have a little bit of a reaction, but then go on and look at other things like earnings? Again, you just never know with these geopolitical issues, and it really depends on what happens and what Iran does in response to Israel's response to their attack on October 1st. We'll be watching this going into next week, but I'm going to be talking about these rising wedge patterns, NASDAQ, the Dow, and the S&P. None of the information has changed on the attack, but I will point out in the video, again, we did get these topping tails, and again, we'll be watching that. The S&P is getting a lower high. NASDAQ got a higher high in the most recent price action, so they are diverging again from one another. This time, S&P is making a lower high, and NASDAQ's making a higher high. Interesting. What becomes of the topping tail? We got a topping tail with the Fed over here. If it has to be confirmed to get a follow-through, the topping tail here, it will be negated if we move and push above it. Okay, here we got a fake out move. Do we have that here, or do we get a legitimate reversal bar? We got one over here. And it didn't get confirmed immediately. We actually went higher, and then we turned. So we'll be watching to see how it unfolds. Again, you got one over here. It was not confirmed. So again, confirmation and a follow through are necessary for candle patterns. We got a topping tail, and we got to see that begin to play out, getting confirmation and a follow through. Just start seeing momentum and other indicators begin to roll over now as we're starting to, or do they turn back up and we end up getting another reference point of a divergence? So I'll show you the other rising wedge formation, including the shadow, in this video. Same is true for NASDAQ. We got a topping tail in the form of a gravestone doji. It has to be confirmed and get a follow through. Do we just sell off and we go back maybe down to the trend line right here and then try to still bounce and build upon this? We'll be watching to see how this unfolds. I do believe we're in a topping process, and I'll talk about that in the video. But again, get these topping tails. NASDAQ moves slightly above this level right here, and we saw sellers into the session. Let's now start a reversal, or is there still more work to be done? We're looking for clues, but I am looking for a top here. More about these patterns and what they mean, and the weekly charts, what's going on there in the video. I will be doing another video on Sunday on other charts that are not in this video. And again, I'll either post it Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, probably Sunday morning. I do have some things I'm doing this weekend, so I'll try to get it posted by Sunday morning. It might be Sunday afternoon. Please support the channel with the link directly below. That allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel. And again, check back for the other video, because I'll be showing you some of my swing trade charts and what's going on there. They tried to flip intraday, but were mostly unsuccessful in doing so. The momentum and the trend signals intraday show you the momentum in the daily time frame. We'll look at the awesome oscillator in the next video. Possible divergences, unless we see the market start to collapse with tensions in the Middle East beginning to heat up here. So we'll see what happens. Again, I'm still watching this upper Bollinger Band. Went and tagged it, got rejection, moved slightly higher on an intraday basis. And again, we still have a lower high. NASDAQ composite moved to a higher high. Don't have that yet on NASDAQ 100, so we'll be watching that. And again, we now see the topping tail get confirmation come Monday and a follow-through where we buy more time with earnings and maybe sell off with the Fed, or with a post-election sell-off after the election. We'll see, which is just right around the corner. So a topping tail here we'll be watching. You know, Over here on NASDAQ, we got this topping tail right here, but then again, we bounced off the 10, still went a little bit higher. So we'll be watching to see what happens with this topping tail. And again, come Monday, or come really Sunday, by the time futures opens up, what happens? Do the markets end up going into the Monday session and on into futures opening on Sunday? Do they end up shrugging this off or have a little bit of volatility and then kind of rebound? Or do we start just seeing a violent downturn? We'll be watching, and we'll be watching the news over the weekend to see what happens. Is there a sigh of relief that it's done? But then what's going to happen? Is Iran going to respond? Do they respond over the weekend, or do they wait? We'll see how it unfolds. But a topping tail on NASDAQ as well, tagging that upper Bollinger Band. Earnings. We've got a lot of earnings, important earnings next week. In light of what's going on with McDonald's, it'll be interesting to see what they say around earnings and their guidance going forward. So pay attention to that. We've got PayPal, we've got Pfizer, we've got JetBlue, important earnings after the bell on Tuesday. AMD. We'll be watching the NASDAQ and the semiconductors with the AMD earnings. Alphabet after the bell. Snap after the bell. Important ones. Visa. Wednesday, Eli Lilly, Caterpillar. We've got Microsoft after the bell. We've got Meta after the bell. We got Coinbase after the bell there on Wednesday. So a lot of important earnings. You can see, I don't have time to read them all, but you can see a lot of companies that are important names and Wall Street darlings. And then Thursday, after the bell, we're going to get Amazon, Apple, we're going to get Intel. Just a lot of important earnings next week, a lot of S&P companies. Thing to be paying attention to is AMD with the NASDAQ. Recently that we saw a semiconductor sell-off with ASML earnings, and then a big rebound back up with an excellent earnings report with Taiwan Semiconductor. It'll be interesting to see what happens with AMD after the bell next Tuesday. That'll be when Alphabet reports and Snap. So again, it'll be interesting to watch that after the bell on Tuesday. So important earnings. Again, Alphabet after the bell on Tuesday, Microsoft and Meta after the bell on Wednesday, Amazon and Apple after the bell on Thursday. So again, a lot of important stocks and Magnificent Seven names. Again, this is what rattled the markets this week. Does it continue to do that? And again, we'll be watching. Ever since the Fed began cutting September 18th, we've seen the yield, continue this uptrend. Now, again, it's moved into this short-term negative correlation, but it's had a positive correlation with the market. We've seen this week the gap higher and the surge, and we saw the S&P sell off, and then we began to try to rally off of Wednesday's lows. And then we Thursday we saw a downturn, and we tried to continue the rally, and then on into Friday. But then the 10-year bounced back. On Friday, it was up 0.75%, and again, that created more volatility. But this is what has been creating the volatility this week. Maybe that continues. Maybe it's other issues like earnings or tensions in the Middle East or the election or the coming Fed or economic data. We are watching these different things, a combination of things that end up rattling the markets. But right now, the S&P tried to rally, and it fizzled out, and it got a topping tail, and I'll show you some of the charts with that quickly. I just want to show you the Dow to compare it to the S&P 500. Again, the Dow got whacked this week with earnings like IBM and Honeywell and McDonald's taking a hit on the E. coli scare. It was down all 5 days of the week. It broke the trend line. We've come to this trend line right here. We're not quite at it yet, but the 50 period is right there in the lower band. So again, we'll be watching to see what happens early on next week. Especially, again, we're going to be getting a lot of earnings next week. But the Dow, all 5 days of the week, breaking this trend line. S&P broke it, but it back tested it. The Dow's holding below that 10 period. The Dow had a little divergence right here, going slightly higher on the RSI, and then the larger divergence Really a Class B divergence on the MACD with almost two equal peaks there, with this peak moving higher above the previous high. And the Dow closed near the lows of the week. The S&P 500 did not. The Dow broke its 6-week winning streak, and the Dow was down 2.68% for the week, more than the S&P 500. Again, getting hurt by McDonald's, getting hurt by earnings, the rattling of the market from the 10-year Treasury note yield. The Dow took a beating this week, and we wiped out the previous 3 weeks of gains with one big swoop. We got a really nice looking parallel channel here. Now, again, this is the log scaling. Really nice looking divergences, multiple point divergences on the RSI here in the weekly time frame. But the Dow getting a reversal, and again, very well may have now peaked with the Dow. With earnings next week, we go up and try to slam into that trend line one more time. We could fill the gap on the Dow, which I believe was that Wednesday sell-off that we had, that sharper decline there on Wednesday. Negative diversions here. So again, just want to show you these weekly charts. Dow very well may have now started the reversal, and if we rally back up, it may only make a lower high should we attempt to recover. If we just start selling off, then maybe the rest of them start joining it. But the Dow does have the gap from Wednesday. It did not fill it. We did fill it today on the S&P. We filled it on NASDAQ. We turned back down, and we got topping tails. So we'll be watching the Dow here in the weekly time frame. Again, the multiple point divergence is likely going to produce a reversal, not a correction. Let's compare this to the S&P 500. But the two trend lines on the S&P to be watching. The two trend lines I've talked about, the one with excluding the shadow, we could just be back testing it right now and resume the decline. Okay. The other possibility is that we include it and we make our way to try to go back up into the upper, above the recent high and above the trend line on a closing basis here. And right now, we've just come and back tested it, at least so far. We've had a rally and it fizzled out. Keeping that in mind, the two trend lines that I've talked about, and here's the other. So I just want to show you both. I'm trying to show you both scenarios. Okay, here we include the shadow right here. And again, we came down towards this level, and then we're trying to bounce off of that with Wednesday's low. Didn't quite reach it. The 20-period moving average acted as support. Came down to the 20-period on Thursday, acted as support. Friday, tried to continue the advance above the 10-period moving average, but we stalled, reversed. We got a topping tail. I'll talk more about that. Real important. Not all topping tails play out. We didn't see the one with the Fed meeting play out. I'll talk about the topping tail. But here we still have a rising wedge, including the shadow. So which trend line is the real deal down still, and which one's the fake, phony, baloney, plastic banana, good time, rock and roll, fake trend line? Which one is the real deal? Keeping that in mind, keeping all of this in mind, these two trend lines, and again, I've been talking about a divergence developing on the awesome oscillator over and over again. I've been mentioning it in every single video. That's still very, very possible, especially here in earnings season. I'm looking for a topping process. I predicted the S&P would move to new highs. Even with the sell-off, I told you we were going to move it. Even though I predicted the sell-off, I told you we were going to move to new highs. We rallied up. I told you that we were going to sell off here. The signals were warning that, but I told you we were still going to move to new highs. Told you we were going to bottom surrounding the jobs report there and rally with the inflation data. We did, and again, we got this. Formed the triangle, and I told you the triangle was going to be a continuation upward, and it was. So again, continue to predict rallies to new all-time highs, and maybe that is putting the finishing touches on that right now. Maybe we still go to one more high, as I've talked about. Divergence is on possibly setting up on the awesome oscillator, and maybe another reference point of a divergence right here on the RSI. We've already had a little divergence right there. So again, I'll be talking about the topping tail in just a moment, but those are the two trend lines. And let's look at how we closed out. We were flat up for the session. Remember, the Dow dropped 2.68%, and it's moving towards the 50. The S&P is not near the 50. It's bouncing off the 20. So let's compare the weekly. Now, well, the Dow was down 2.68%. The S&P was just under 1% lower, 0.96. It lost 57 points rounding up. So whereas the Dow lost over 1,100 points this week, it was down 2.68%. The S&P down just under 1%. So the Dow was down more than double that percentage-wise. And again, we've got the divergences here in the weekly time frame. Nice looking channel right here again. And again, if we connect this point here and this point here, we came right up into that trend line last week. And I talked about the winning streak. We had a 6-week winning streak. The Dow broke that. So did the S&P 500. And again, we broke the winning streak. And the divergence is now completing. Again, do we hover up in this area with earnings, or do we start turning down? If so, what moves the market up or down? Is it earnings? Is it tensions in the Middle East? Is it the election, the coming Fed? The 10-year Treasury note yield? We'll be watching to see how this unfolds. We've got this triple divergence, beautiful triple divergence here on the MACD. Again, by the time this rolls over, we're going to be moving off of these levels in all likelihood. Maybe that is starting now with the topping tail that we got on the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. We'll see what happens. And again, if you look at these divergences on the MACD and the RSI, down here on the MACD, again, the bullish divergence right here mark the bottom. The bearish divergence up here mark the top. Again, we have a very similar divergence to what we had over here. And again, the similarities with price are pretty amazing. But again, same thing up here with the RSI. Again, bullish divergence, bearish divergence, and again, you got bearish divergence. Now, this is likely going to produce a reversal, not just a pullback. Whether it's done or not is a $64,000 question. We've got to see evidence of that, and there still is the possibility of a bearish divergence forming on the Awesome Oscillator and another reference point of a divergence on the RSI on the S&P daily chart. Now comparing the Dow, which sold off 2.68%, broke the winning streak, the 6-week winning streak. The S&P down almost 1%, broke the winning streak. NASDAQ did not. It has a 7-week winning streak, just barely squeaked out a game, but got a doji. Again, I've told you NASDAQ was going to rally up to the 20,400 area, and it now has done that. My guess is it's going to get a lower high here. If I'm wrong, it's going to go slam up into that trend line right there again. Last time we were moving towards it, I told you I thought a top was going to form there, and I told you July 11th, the day after the peak on July 10th, that I thought that was a top. If I'm wrong, we move up into this trend line again, and there's another one that we hit in the monthly time frame. On the NASDAQ 100 weekly chart. Now, NASDAQ Composite, which is all inclusive, the tech-heavy NASDAQ there, it moved to a new high. The NASDAQ 100 ETF QQQ, it did not. Still may do it. If I'm wrong about that, this is where we're going. So that's I've told you the other scenario. But I have the guts to tell you what I think. And I told you I thought we topped over here. I still think that. I could be wrong about that, but I tell you what I think. Again, I thought we'd rally up here to 20,400. We did. Bounced off this trend line right here. And again, the upper boundary is this parallel boundary with the low here from the pandemic bottom, the October 2022 low, a very nice looking large channel. Now, right here, this is a linear scaling. If we look at the log scaling, we got a pretty nice channel here from these lows. Again, if we do establish a lower high or get the higher high and go up and hit the trend line on that linear scaling again, I'll be watching to see if we come back and we start moving below the 20 and breaking these trend lines, the one I have on the linear and here the one I have on the log. And again, we could even take it back from this low over here and draw it. But if I bring it up close, you can see we got a candle of indecision in the form of a spinning top. We had a low doji last week, so a couple candles of indecision. That could be suggesting that momentum is starting to wane here around our gap fill area. We did end up forming the divergence today that I talked about in the more recent price action filling that gap. We moved above the previous gap fill. I've been talking about that. Still may not be done. I'll show you what I'm watching for with the awesome oscillator. But NASDAQ got a 7-week winning streak. We'll see if that breaks going into next week. The 6-week winning streak was broken on the Dow and on the S&P 500. Major earnings as we go into next week. Talked about the two trend lines on the S&P. Let me show you the two trend lines on the NASDAQ. Talking about the lower boundary here. And again, one we're back testing. The other, we're still holding above it. So do we start breaking the other trend line? And again, just have a back test of this trend line? Or do we try to go back up a little higher and form a divergence above this peak? Maybe a triple divergence on the RSI. So these two lower boundaries, I've been talking about these trend lines on the S&P. Let me show you the trend lines on NASDAQ. Here it is, and I've got a couple different charts to show you with the NASDAQ daily chart. But again, I've been talking about this smaller rising wedge in red right here. And again, we're back testing that. We broke down, and we're back testing. We went above it on an intraday basis, but we got a topping tail in the form of a gravestone doji. Will the gravestone doji be confirmed and mark a reversal here, and that's it? Possibly. It could possibly be done now. We still have the possibility of divergences, but we need to be looking for more, for clues. We need to see more evidence if the top is now in. We could still, come up here and hit these trend lines, but we were just shy of, and get something like this. We got a topping tail over here with the Fed, but it didn't play out. We still ended up going higher. So candlesticks have to be confirmed. They got to get a follow through, so we'll be watching that. But we did move higher than the peak over here with our gap fill from about 2 weeks ago now. I told you we can go back. I told you we can go back and test this level and still see that. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's not done yet. But these are the trend lines that I'm watching. You have this larger rising wedge. You have this smaller rising wedge that's in back test mode right now, just like the S&P 500. Remember, the Dow has already had a bigger sell-off. It sold off all week. I talked about why. And just real fast, again, I said I believe a top is over here, and we'll see if that ends up being correct, if we start a reversal or go a little bit higher and start a reversal. But we're forming a double top on NASDAQ. That could be with a slightly higher high or a lower high, either one. Even though I predicted the peak that was leading up into the rally there, that I said a top was going to happen, and then the very day after, I said I thought that was a top. The sell-off I predicted would happen. I told you we're going to go back and fill that gap, and that's now happened. If you've been hearing me say the market's going to sell off and crash, you're not listening to what I'm saying. I've been saying 20,400 for months now. Ever since we got this gap lower, I've been talking about it. The S&P is going to go move to a new high. It's going to make a new all-time high, and then we're going to see this topping process. Some people don't want to hear that. Some people tune out and only hear what they want to hear. At the rally, the S&P's at new all-time highs. NASDAQ's up here filling the gap, so now I'm looking for the top. Now there's complete complacency. The bears have thrown in the towel. They no longer believe the market is going to sell off. And when it happens, it's going to be very, very violent. It's going to be very ugly. Bulls, totally complacent. They don't believe it's possible.